Kaya, and welcome to Real World Applications, where we're going to start to evolve and look at how we bring these things. We say real world applications, but they're more things that you and I are used to using in our normal everyday lives. So we first want to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, noting their significant contribution to science, to engineering, to education. And we pay respects to First Nations people all across the areas where we as Curtin University teach. Are you not learning outcomes? You should be familiar with these because this is what drives everything we do. Let's dive in. And I say originally. Well, in the beginning was the command line interface, the CLI. And the computer scientists saw it was good. Computing on the first day. Well, that's a little bit how you might want to describe it. But evolution has occurred greatly, as you can possibly imagine. Or as I say, then human beings got involved. And the moment human beings get involved, everything changes, which is brilliant. And what happened when humans got involved is we realized that that computer scientist command line interface, well, it might not be all that it's cracked up to be for the everyday user. And we had computing on the second day. The question I guess I ask is the command line interface dead? And really, it is an extremely powerful way that we can go about doing tasks. Just because you're used to click, 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 does not mean it's what you should be doing all the time. The command line interface gives you a phenomenal way to interact and perform tasks. Things such as batch processing, and if you're unsure what batch processing is, it's when we take a whole bunch of things that need to be processed one after the other, if you like, so it does a batch of things. We also have repeater tasks that need to be repeated over and over and over again, and the command line interface is a very powerful way to do that. Also, testing your programs with different data. We can test our programs with different data really quite simply from the command line, and particularly the programs that we have been creating. You could pipe input into it for output, and you can pipe that output directly into a text field, a text file, and see what happens. Lots more. So I would say it's not dead. We just may not be overly familiar with it. So does this mean that the GUI is king? Okay. And this depends, as we say, on who do you ask to answer that question. If you were to offer, for instance, my father the command line interface, he would have no idea what to do. If you offer him a GUI, he still might not have, no, he would be able to work with that, but he's not a computing person. He's not got a computing background. So to him, the GUI would be king. If you were to offer the command line interface to Donald Knuth, I'm sure he would say this is what is king. Okay, so it depends on who we're working with, depends on the answer we're going to get. And what are you trying to do? What you're trying to do will often determine which one you use, the command line or the GUI. Well designed, okay? I say in most cases, what I mean here is well designed GUIs are phenomenal. They look brilliant and they just function how you expect them to function. So there are many places that the GUI works really well. Let's face it, okay? And that's okay. So we need to be adapting to the task we have at hand. Non-computing people, I've already said, easy for them to use. So I say it's not necessarily king, but it might be the crown prince. So what actually is a GUI? If you haven't already picked that up, a graphical user interface. That's what it is. So I say it's a different way to interact with the computer. And some might say, well, it's the normal way. But I'm taking it from a historical perspective when we started with the command line interface, and from there we moved to the GUI. So now we have a new way to interact with the computer. Visual interaction. That's really what it is. A great way to be able to visually interact with your computer. I've said this looks fantastic, and in many situations, it is extremely effective. So why are we using this so much in PDI up until this point in time? Well, it allows us to do programming and coding really without distraction, because the moment we start pulling GUIs up on the screen, okay, then we start to get, oh, do we want the text this way? Or do we want it that color? Or should it go like that? We can get distracted. And this unit is about fundamentally understanding how to go about coding. So this is why we tend to keep in the CLI area. Okay. The other thing is it's also a fundamental use from computer professionals, because we like to build automations, and the command line really allows us to do that. This is something that's important. Computing profession is different from those professions that use computers. So when I'm talking about in the computing profession, I'm talking not that you use Microsoft Word or Apple Pages to do things, but that you're coding things up. What else and why else? Well, the CLI gives us an understanding as to what's going on when we start dealing with a GUI. Once we understand things such as user input, okay, selection, then we can start to apply those into a GUI interface. And I've pretty much covered this. PDI is about this fundamental basics of programming. Simplicity of a GUI. What do we really mean? Well, the elegance, the simplicity of working in a GUI can be very misleading. And what I mean by that in being misleading is that it can be extremely complex under the surface, what's really going on. And you tend to find that the more hidden the user is, okay, so the more hidden the user is away by a GUI, and when I'm saying hidden, I mean hidden from what's going on underneath, then the more complex programming that's generally required. The look of a GUI is an art form, and I cannot overemphasize enough the importance of having really good GUI designers. So you may want to bring in graphical designers and people who have a great art sense when it comes to designing your GUIs. The logic that drives everything behind it is programming. Don't let that be hidden or taken away from you, but the art is still the art. The basics of a GUI. I think we've all seen things like this. You might have the 3 dots, the X and things like that, but this is the basics of a GUI. And then something like that, the counter app. Click here, you have clicked XYZ times. And what I want to say, keep track of that, because we come all the way back at the end to our counter app. GUIs really started to evolve, and we can see here the evolution of GUIs. And when I say the evolution, it's not in the stages, but this is where some things are at this point in time. And that's a pretty complex view that we're looking at there. And you'll start to grasp an understanding of how complex a view that is when you see the simple programs we write and what goes into bringing them onto the screen. Here we have a much more complex GUI that's got all kinds of things going on within it. And all of this has been coded as it takes input. We need to keep those things in mind.